Well, that raises, already you have raised a lot, and I want to get to this question of whether having the total permanent record is actually useful for us, because you write in this book about the effect of this kind of revolution, how it might destroy books, and what the loss of a book means, and what the loss of an individual story means when you have a certain sameness that comes from everybody being able to express themselves. But before we do that, you've touched on so much already. How the hell do you write your books? What is your process? Do you write all these things down, read them, remember them, and get up every morning and regurgitate what you took in the day before and then shape it? Or what is the usual Coupland process?
I mean, number one, discipline, discipline, discipline. You know that. Nothing long or extensive is ever going to get made unless you put aside the same time period every day, weekends, weekday, whatever, as much as you can. You have to have that to get anything long done. So that's number one. Number two, I used to make notes. I don't make notes anymore. And that stopped about 10 years ago. And I always write in one direction from A to Z. And I have a wonderful editor, Ann Collins, working with her for a decade now. And she'll go through it and she'll cross out a paragraph here or there saying, don't need this, don't need that. And there's the scariest one, which is do better. And that's like, okay, she called me on it. But I don't believe in cut and paste. I don't think you can cut a chunk from here and move it backwards or around or forwards. I think that long form fiction is intrinsically linear, one direction, and needs to be written as such.
You love language. You don't talk about it much, but you really have a lovely way with words. In this book alone, there is the bloated, foot-long, buttery carb dildo, which describes an ear of corn. There are the rhyming, crunching waves coming up on Egg Beach, I believe it is, on a stone beach. There's the distinction you make at one point, and you make several distinctions about varieties of darkness, but there's a distinction between darkness and chemical darkness.
Yes.
But as I was reading it, I thought, it's so great to read a great, witty writer who loves style. But is style important in this new informational world where everybody writes? It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be as valued.
Style in what sense? Sorry.
Linguistic play, linguistic sophistication, dazzling sentence, the ability to vary the length of one's sentences, or perhaps use the word irony properly.
Well, I think one of the ways of approaching writing is, if you were to give this sample of writing to people and say, who wrote this? And if they can say, oh, it was Doug or it was Ian, then you're probably doing the right thing. I'm not coming out of a lit background, so when people raise certain issues like that, theory I can understand, style qua style, I don't quite understand. My approach to words was, and I've said it a million times and I'll continue to say it, which is that looking at the World Book Encyclopedia, 1970, Glenmore Elementary, letter P, pop art, wham, there was a Roy Lichtenstein painting and a Campbell soup can, and I looked at the letters, and that's it. Words are now aestheticized. And then 10 years later, there was Jenny Holzer, who took words and put them into sentences. And from there, it was a very quick leap into seeing paragraphs, books as themselves aesthetic. Sometimes I don't feel like I write books. Sometimes I feel like I'm making sculptures of books, and which is another sort of finesse kind of thing. By the way, people back there can hear me now. The stuff you missed, it was fantastic. It was so good. And you'll just have to, well, it's gone now.
So if technology is, as you suggest, a more, is a neutral thing, that you can say it's good or bad, it has its good and bad sides, but one cannot decide, obviously.
Well, we made it. It is us. It's not something outside of us. We created it. And whatever we do with it can only be an expression of humanity, for better or worse.
But we also created capitalism. And you seem to be harder on unbridled capitalism than you are on technology. And we also created our love of fame, which you, at least in this book, is a real villain.
Well, it's a plus or a minus. I think let's go to, and I was really blessed this year that I did the Marshall McLuhan biography, because it answered so many larger questions, because he really did look at the larger picture. And what he postulated, and what I think is true, and what's proving to be very true, is that up until the book, as we know it, people really didn't have a voice inside their heads. They kind of went through their life, but life was sound effects. And sometimes if they heard words, they would think it wasn't even themselves, it was the gods talking or something. And they didn't approach individuality that way. But once we created the notion of the individual, you created capitalism, but you created the middle classes, you created Freudianism, Marxism, feminism, all the isms that are based on the role of the atomized individual versus the whole came out of the book. And so now that we are, and I mean, I've been doing books for a long time, so have you. How long have you heard, are the books dead? Are books coming to an end? It's like, okay, maybe newspapers, sorry if you're newspapers, but not books for the time being. The notion of individuality and what it creates, I think that's the larger picture of what's at stake here. Am I harsh on capitalism? Yes, because it can create some really boring results. And you look at the States, and I'm sorry if you're American, but it's just, okay.
All of the states?
Well, aside from the coasts, you know.
Go except
if you ever try to find a good restaurant or a good bookstore in like Fort Worth, Texas, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And this is where I find out that like the Fort Worth, like traveling Wilburys or something are here in the audience. A lot of the isms, you know, communism's largely gone, socialism is mutated into something else. We're losing the isms, and now we're kind of shedding the ego, and what's going to replace ism as a suffix? And I think that's going to define the next century.
Mm. There are 4 characters in this book who get stung or are victimized, though they fight against it, by big pharmacy, by the pharmaceutical industry, by the decaying environment, by people trying to take advantage of them. They fight against that by telling stories to one another. Mm-hmm. And this book, like some of your others, has a lot of embedded stories in it. Why did you choose to embed stories within a story, and why is the story so important? You say in this book it might be the thing that saves us.
Well, it's pattern recognition, and that's Marshall again. Bless him wherever you are now. That when you are involved in a maelstrom situation where you're just inundated with too much technology or too much information, the only thing that can protect you, whether or not it works or not doesn't matter, but the very act of trying to recognize patterns will save you, will keep you from being pulled down. I think, again, by telling smaller stories within a larger story, themes emerge. Like, for example, the Channel 3 news team, which is the metaphor for the internal voice that you or I or anyone used to read the paper with every day. For me, that was a very big one.